Okay, let's start this deep dive with a figure I think whose face is now, globally recognized
Instantly.
instantly. But he's often seen through this lens of cinematic grandeur, and the reality, the historical truth, is just so much more complex.
It is, and it's often obscured by the very fame that he never really sought in the first place.
We are talking, of course, about Ip Man, a name that for many is synonymous with Wing Chun with its global spread. But his life, when you actually look at the sources, wasn't defined by these spectacular public fights.
No, not at all. It was defined by quiet preservation, by immense struggle, and by just relentless social upheaval.
So I think our mission here is, well, it's vital. We need to peel back the layers of that cinematic myth.
The flawless hero, right?
Yeah.
The unstoppable fighter.
Exactly. And focus entirely on the historical man. We're going to be looking at a human being who was just profoundly affected by the cataclysmic events of 20th century China.
And understanding that turbulence, that deep chaos, is really the only way you can understand his relationship with his art.
It wasn't a choice of ambition, was it?
No. It was a relationship forged entirely in necessity.
And that tension is so critical for you, the listener, to understand. When we see Ip Man on screen, we see resilience, we see dignity, perfect technique.
That's the cinematic portrayal.
But the historical Ip Man, our sources confirm he was someone shaped by war, by the complete destruction of his family's wealth, by displacement.
By the constant grinding struggle for basic survival. He was responsible, yes, incredibly disciplined, but he was certainly not immune to tragedy or to, human flaws.
Exactly. And his true genius, it wasn't some undefeated fighting record. I mean, that's largely undocumented in terms of public spectacle.
His real achievement was much quieter, almost reluctant in a way. It was the preservation and then the global transmission of Wing Chun Kung Fu.
And you have to consider the context. This was happening during an era when so many traditional Chinese arts were just fading away.
Right. They were either disappearing because of modernity or they were being commercialized into, theatrical displays. He found a third path.
And crucially, he never set out to build some sort of global martial arts empire. That wasn't the goal.
Not in the modern sense, no. The sources are pretty clear that he often taught reluctantly. It was primarily out of sheer economic necessity. He broke with centuries of tradition just to pay the rent.
And that right there is the core paradox of his legacy. His flight from his home in Foshan to Hong Kong, the poverty that followed, it forced this catastrophic break with his past.
It was a matter of survival. And that survival instinct compelled him to break that tradition of closely guarded, family-only knowledge.
So his life story really becomes this profound exploration of the tension between tradition, honor, and secrecy.
And the essential pragmatic need to adapt just to survive in a world that was collapsing around him. It was this necessity that turned Wing Chun from a localized classical Chinese martial art into the global cultural phenomenon it is today.
So let's begin where that foundation was laid, in a place that really defined so much of his early life. Foshan. He was born in 1893 in Guangdong province. What was the significance of that city? What was it like at the turn of the 20th century?
Well, Foshan was much more than just a provincial town. It was an established powerhouse of traditional southern Chinese culture, of trade, and very specifically of martial arts.
So it's on the Pearl River Delta, a hub of commerce.
Exactly. Its prosperity meant it could attract and sustain all these different cultural institutions. And martial arts weren't seen as just, self-defense for soldiers or for street thugs.
You were part of the culture.
They were utterly interwoven into the city's social fabric.
So we're talking about an ecosystem, a place where you have this high concentration of different kung fu styles. You have visible, elaborate lion dance troupes, opera performers.
Precisely. Martial skill carried profound social respect. It was an environment of deep inherited tradition. So if you were interested in martial arts in Foshan, you were just surrounded by this rich culture of competition, of tradition, and intellectual exploration of movement.
And that context is important because it let Ip Man engage with the art as more than just a fighting tool.
Yes, it was a cultural and a philosophical discipline from the very beginning for him.
Which brings us to a really surprising aspect of his upbringing. I mean, so many famous martial artists from that period came from extremely poor backgrounds. They learned to fight to survive.
In incredibly rough circumstances.
But Ip Man's start was the complete inverse of that narrative.
Absolutely. He was born into a highly privileged family. His father was a substantial landowner, a merchant.
And that wealth gave him advantages that were just rare among his peers in the martial arts world.
Monumental advantages. He received a formal classical education, he became deeply literate, and he developed the refined manners you'd expect from a member of the Chinese scholar gentry class.
So how did that privileged background really shape his approach to martial arts? Did it set him apart from other students?
It fundamentally shaped his disposition. Unlike those who saw martial arts purely as, street survival, Ip Man approached it through a lens of discipline, of structure, and of respect.
So it was a choice.
It was a choice of intellectual and physical mastery, not a desperation for protection. And this refinement, it set him apart from many of the, let's say, rougher fighters. It fostered a very analytical rather than a purely aggressive approach to Wing Chun.
So when he started his training under Chen Huaxin, a master known as Money Changer Hua,
Because of his profession.
it wasn't about seeking brute power, it was about finding a system that matched his own intellectual curiosity.
That's exactly why Wing Chun resonated with him so deeply. I mean, it is fundamentally a pragmatic system. It's built on principles of efficiency, precise structure, timing, economy of motion.
It's not about being the biggest or strongest person in the room.
Not at all, which he wasn't. It emphasizes intelligence, sensitivity, and internal discipline over raw external force. For a young man with a scholarly background, Wing Chun offered a scientific, almost engineering-like approach to combat.
And his early foundations were incredibly deep. He didn't just study under Chen Huaxin. After the master fell ill, he transitioned to Ning Chengsak, a senior disciple.
Right, which meant his foundational period was comprehensive. It was built across several years, and it incorporated perspectives from multiple sources, but all within that same direct lineage.
That consistency and depth must have been crucial.
Oh, absolutely. He spent his formative years just absorbing the art's core principles and mechanics from the original master and his direct senior students. This ensured he wasn't just learning techniques, he was building this unbraidable understanding of Wing Chun's underlying structure.
So that rigorous early phase, it provided an anchor.
It was the anchor that allowed him, later in life, to encounter and integrate radically new ideas without ever losing his roots in the system.
Which brings us to the next phase, his education in Hong Kong. This is, perhaps the pivotal moment in his development.
Not just for his life, but for the entire system of Wing Chun he would later transmit.
Right. Moving from traditional Foshan to colonial Hong Kong must have been a huge shift. He's suddenly at the crossroads of East and West.
The change was monumental. Hong Kong in the early 20th century was under British rule. It was a massive, bustling nexus of international trade, finance, new political ideas.
A world away from the conservative social norms of Foshan.
Dramatically removed. For Ip Man, who was sent there for a formal modern education, it represented a huge intellectual expansion. It forced him to move beyond purely classical Chinese thought.
And it was here, while he's pursuing his studies, that chance, or maybe you'd call it destiny, intervenes. He meets Lung Bic, the son of the legendary master Lung Mian. And this meeting, it wasn't just a convenient encounter, it fundamentally redefined his entire understanding of Wing Chun.
It represents a crucial and very rare generational bridge in the history of the art. Lung Bic recognized Ip Man's potential, that intellectual discipline, that excellent foundation, and he accepted him as a student.
Probably in a private setting.
Oh, most likely private and informal. And the focus of the training shifted dramatically. Ip Man had the structure and the mechanics from Foshan, but under Lung Bic, the focus became refinement, internal understanding.
So if we were to use an analogy like a building,
Yeah.
Chen Huaxin gave him the strong, functional, load-bearing structure.
And Lung Bic provided the sophisticated interior design, the operational physics of it all. That's a perfect analogy.
He's teaching subtlety.
Subtlety, sensitivity, the internal application of force. It was about moving beyond rigid, learned techniques and approaching Wing Chun as a truly living system that required constant adaptation. This process bridged the knowledge of two distinct generations. It injected a deep philosophical insight into the practical framework Ip Man already possessed.
So what was the key lesson here? The one that shaped his later philosophy?
I think the essential lesson was that martial arts are not static. They are not a fixed library of techniques to be memorized.
They're dynamic.
They're dynamic systems requiring constant refinement, deep internal understanding, and adaptability. He learned to feel energy, to manage structure, to understand timing. He shifted from just executing movements to understanding the principle behind the movement.
So he becomes an analyst of motion and pressure.
Exactly, not just a capable fighter. And this analytical approach, it stayed with him.
Which is confirmed when he returns to Foshan. Because he doesn't immediately set up a school, does he?
No, he doesn't. Significantly, he takes a position as a police officer. And this confirms that during this respectable phase of his life, Wing Chun was still a personal discipline.
A mastery he possessed and practiced, but not yet a public vocation.
Right. It wasn't his livelihood. He was living the stable, respectable life afforded by his education and his family's status.
And that stable, respectable life, rooted in inherited wealth and local authority in Foshan, was about to be just utterly destroyed.
By forces far beyond his control.
This brings us to the devastating impact of the Sino-Japanese War and the chaos of World War II.
This era is so critical because it fundamentally humanizes him. It transforms him from a refined scholar and a local official into a displaced survivor.
The war brought unprecedented suffering to southern China. Foshan, which was once the symbol of cultural and commercial prosperity, was occupied. It was ravaged.
And the war didn't just change the geopolitical map, it systematically dismantled his personal foundation. His family's wealth, which was the buffer that allowed him the luxury of studying martial arts as a refined discipline.
Rather than a necessity.
It was wiped out, land confiscated, property lost, financial systems just collapsed.
The collapse of his social status was total. His position as a police officer became untenable.
It symbolized the decaying social order, and he experienced the crushing reality of poverty, a state he had never ever known. We often prefer that romanticized image of the master fighting off invaders.
Right.
But the sources paint a far bleaker picture. He struggled simply to provide basic food for his family. He sometimes had to rely on the aid of friends just to get by.
And that is the essential non-romanticized reality we have to emphasize. He wasn't fighting heroic one-on-one duels. He was engaged in the desperate, everyday struggle of keeping his family clothed and fed.
Displacement, loss. The cessation of regular practice were the defining elements of this phase. The art became secondary, a luxury he couldn't afford compared to the desperate reality of daily survival.
So this hardship, it unknowingly prepared him for his future role.
It forced him to fundamentally reconsider Wing Chun's true value. It was no longer a pastime or a mark of a respectable gentleman. It was potentially his only marketable skill, his last resort.
And this situation ultimately leads to his final flight from Foshan. When the communist government took full control of the mainland, his past roles and status made his life impossible.
So he fled to Hong Kong.
And you have to think about that moment. He arrives in Hong Kong in his late 50s.
An age when men of his background would be enjoying the fruits of their life's work.
And he arrives as an economic refugee. He has no money, no property, no network, no clear future.
He was a complete and brutal reversal of his privileged beginnings.
And yet, it was precisely at this moment of absolute personal low, when he had nothing left but his deep mastery of Wing Chun, that his most enduring work was about to begin.
He was forced to monetize the discipline that had previously only served his personal enlightenment. And this financial pressure, ironically, is what ultimately launched Wing Chun onto the global stage.
If that hadn't happened,
he may have remained a quiet practitioner, and the art might have just faded away on the mainland.
So necessity truly became the engine of global transmission. Arriving in Hong Kong, faced with poverty, he had to turn Wing Chun from a personal discipline into a public vocation.
One he had previously avoided. And it was an incredibly difficult turning point. Hong Kong was a crowded, competitive place.
So his initial teaching setup was very informal?
Highly informal. He started small, teaching little groups of workers in rented rooms, often provided by union associations, for meager fees.
He wasn't establishing some grand academy.
No, he was simply trying to keep the wolf from the door.
And this need, this desperation for income, led him to make a revolutionary decision, a decision that would change the trajectory of Wing Chun forever.
He decided to teach openly, and to teach those outside his immediate family or circle.
And the radical nature of this decision, I mean, it can't be overstated.
Not for anyone familiar with traditional Chinese martial arts culture, no. Knowledge was fiercely guarded. It was a valuable asset, kept within the family lineage or restricted to a few very loyal indoor disciples.
So revealing the core secrets of a system to strangers for a fee.
It was a profound breach of custom, a huge break with tradition.
Why was that secrecy so entrenched? Why did his decision to break it matter so much?
Well, secrecy preserved the art's exclusivity, its competitive edge, and of course the master's authority. By teaching openly, Even if he was reluctant and driven by economic necessity, Ip Man fundamentally dismantled the gatekeeping mechanism that had kept Wing Chun localized for centuries.
So that openness was the single most important factor.
Without a doubt, it's what allowed Wing Chun to survive the political chaos and later globalize. If he had rigidly adhered to the old ways, the art may well have vanished entirely.
So let's look at his actual teaching style. It sounds like the complete antithesis of the typical, flamboyant martial arts master.
It was quiet, methodical, and highly focused on mechanical efficiency. He was known to be reserved, even distant or impatient at times. He certainly wasn't a charismatic theatrical showman.
His focus was entirely on the engineering principles of the system.
Yes, teaching correct, relaxed structure and developing acute sensitivity. He demanded that students focus on the fundamentals. The first form, Silim Tao, which means little idea, was the absolute core.
And that focus on Silim Tao, it underscores the importance of structure. Why does that simple, static form matter so much in a dynamic fighting system?
Because it's the blueprint for the entire system.
Yeah.
Silim Tao teaches the student how to establish and maintain a structurally sound framework. The center line, the elbow position, the vertical punch.
He understood that if the structure is correct, the energy transmission is efficient.
Exactly. He would often emphasize that Wing Chun requires total relaxation to transmit force effectively. Any tension in the wrong place destroys the structure and diminishes the power.
So the core message was, don't force techniques. Build a correct structure and let the technique express itself efficiently within that framework.
Precisely. And this focus on sensitivity, the ability to feel the opponent's pressure, their direction, their intention, is what ultimately defines Wing Chun and makes it so practical at close range.
Students were taught to adapt based on tactile input.
Rather than relying solely on visual cues or trying to force some predetermined sequence. This analytical structural approach stood in sharp contrast to many of the more external aggressive systems that relied purely on external strength and complex dramatic forms.
And any discussion of Ip Man students inevitably leads us to the figure who became really the global lightning rod for martial arts, Bruce Lee. We need to detail this relationship accurately without falling into the trap of exaggerating Lee's direct time with him.
Bruce Lee's time training under Ip Man during his tumultuous teenage years in Hong Kong was, historically speaking, relatively brief.
Maybe 5 or 6 years.
Something like that, and often intermittent, especially when you compare it to other students who remained for decades. However, its influence was undeniably monumental. It shaped it.
Credited Wing Chun as the absolute, non-negotiable foundational influence.
He absorbed critical, specific, and lasting concepts. First and foremost, the centerline theory, this idea of attacking and defending the shortest, most vulnerable line between you and an opponent.
Second would be economy of motion.
Yes, stressing that the simplest, most direct path is always the most efficient. And third, the sensitivity drills, particularly Chisao, or sticking hands.
Let's spend a moment on Chisao, because Ip Man's emphasis on it is what makes his Wing Chun so distinctive. Why is this tactile drill so revolutionary?
Well, Chisao is a two-person drill. It's designed to eliminate visual reaction time by replacing it with tactile reflex.
So you're maintaining constant contact.
Constant contact with an opponent's forearms to literally read their structure and their intention instantaneously. It trains you to find gaps and apply force while simultaneously protecting your own centerline.
So Ip Man taught that if you are structurally correct and relaxed, you can feel when your opponent is compromised.
It's essentially fighting without sight, relying on the sensitivity of your limbs. And this efficiency, this tactile feedback, it became a cornerstone of Bruce Lee's philosophy.
But we have to contextualize Lee's role accurately. While he became this international icon and indirectly shouted the name Ip Man onto the world stage.
The master himself remained quiet and localized in Hong Kong.
Right. Lee's celebrity didn't translate into Ip Man's financial success or public acclaim.
No, and that's the necessary balance we have to strike. Lee was the accidental amplifier that drew global attention to the principles, but the true, quiet agents of Wing Chun's systematic worldwide spread were other core disciples.
We have to highlight figures like Long Sheng, Wang Shenlong, and Mo Yat.
These individuals were absolutely instrumental. They established schools, they trained instructors who didn't just stay in Hong Kong, they moved across the globe.
They adapted Wing Chun to new cultural contexts.
In Europe, North America, Southeast Asia. For instance, Wang Shenlong was famous for testing the practicality of Wing Chun in real-world challenges, these Beimo fights, proving its efficacy.
And that drew in a new type of student.
It did. And Moyat, on the other hand, was known for his dedication to preserving the traditional art and philosophy, documenting much of Ip Man's teaching and personal history.
So the survival of Wing Chun, then, is a direct result of Ip Man's radical openness in teaching.
Absolutely. It allowed the system to escape the confines of a single city and a single lineage.
That forced break from tradition allowed it to survive.
It did. By sharing it widely, he ensured it transcended a single region, leading to that unprecedented worldwide expansion after his death. It's a powerful lesson in transmitting knowledge openly versus hoarding it.
Moving into his core philosophy, the word that seems to define Ip Man's approach to martial arts is just unwavering practicality.
That is the ultimate non-negotiable metric for him. The system must work under pressure, regardless of the practitioner's size or external strength.
And everything about Wing Chun is rooted in that practicality over spectacle.
The focus on close-range combat, the principle of simultaneous defense and offense, its structural efficiency. If a movement didn't contribute directly to immediate, effective self-defense, he considered it superfluous.
He was filtering out the unnecessary complexities that build up in older systems.
He was bringing it down to a core engineering problem.
Yeah.
Exactly. He taught that you have to maximize efficiency. Why block and then strike when you can do both at the same time? Why use a massive, wide movement when a small, direct one works faster?
He discouraged flashy kicks, wide stances.
Anything that compromised the center line. This pragmatism was about survival in close-quarter, unpredictable conflict.
And the forms, the codified movements like Silim Tao or Chum Kyo, they weren't meant to be rigid sequences.
No. In his view, the forms were sophisticated training blueprints. They taught you how to generate relaxed force, how to maintain a stable structure while moving, and how to manage energy flow.
The real skill was translating those principles into a dynamic situation.
A living, unpredictable, high-pressure situation. It was a philosophy centered entirely on dynamic adaptation.
And this intense pragmatism was inseparable from a strong ethical core. His teaching wasn't just about fighting.
Not at all. It was explicitly about personal discipline and restraint. Humility, respect for oneself and others, and profound restraint were central tenets.
So for Ip Man, martial arts were never an excuse for aggression.
Or a pursuit of dominance over others. He actively discouraged his students from engaging in unnecessary challenges or seeking validation by picking fights in the street.
The goal wasn't dominance, but self-mastery.
Precisely. And that ethical dimension really distinguished his approach from many purely competitive systems. The training was meant to build confidence and capability to such a degree that you never needed to prove it.
The greatest victory is the one avoided.
Exactly. And that restraint, particularly in the chaotic environment of post-war Hong Kong, was a real moral anchor for his students.
We have to now address the complexity of the man himself, returning to our mission to present the historical figure, not the cinematic icon.
Right. We've established he was not a flawless hero.
And to truly appreciate his resilience, we need to acknowledge the reality of his personal struggles in his later years.
Viewing him as a complex historical figure isn't optional. It's essential for intellectual honesty. It's the only way to understand the immense pressure he was under.
His life in Hong Kong was characterized by significant difficulties. He suffered from chronic illness, and despite his growing reputation as a master,
He faced persistent and often severe financial difficulties. Hong Kong was an extremely high-cost city.
it's easy to assume that because he taught the man who became Bruce Lee, his life was suddenly prosperous.
But that simply wasn't the case. Not at all. His schools were often marginal, relying on union hall space or small rented studios. He was teaching to survive, not to accumulate wealth.
The contrast is stark.
Between the global mythology and the local reality of his financial strain, it's very stark. He was a refugee, separated from his family for long periods, trying to recreate a life from absolutely nothing.
And the historical record is clear that his struggles included personal habits that are, systematically omitted from the romanticized cinematic narratives.
He struggled with opium addiction in his later years.
And we have to include that to present the full picture.
It is part of the documented historical record by his own students and biographers. It provides necessary context for the immense, crushing weight of pressure he was navigating.
The profound sense of loss from his displacement.
The chronic financial stress of supporting himself and family members from afar, and the physical decline of aging and illness.
And that level of adversity has to be factored into any assessment of his dedication. Despite these intense pressures, the addiction, the pain, the financial strain, he continued to teach.
He continued to teach and refine his art until the very end of his life. And that is the most profound testament to his character and his resilience,
He chose to keep guiding students.
even while wrestling with severe personal challenges. And what's more, his core humility remained constant. He never sought to consolidate power, never claimed public supremacy over other masters.
He fundamentally believed that true understanding came from continuous learning.
An open-ended, lifelong process,
Yep.
not from achieving some final state of perfection. He was a constant student of his own art.
Ip Man passed away in 1972 at the age of 79. What was the state of Wing Chun at that exact moment? Had it achieved global recognition yet?
Not yet. Not really. While his influence was strong within the martial arts communities of Hong Kong and Southeast Asia, Wing Chun was still relatively small.
It hadn't achieved the global status of something like Tai Chi.
No, or the Northern styles. He laid a very strong foundation in Hong Kong, but the massive global expansion was still in its infancy.
So his immediate legacy was then carried forward by his most dedicated students who all interpreted the art through their own unique experiences.
Yes, and this leads us to a critical and kind of counterintuitive concept. Fragmentation is survival.
How does that work?
Because Ip Man did not centralize authority or demand absolute rigidity, which was a departure from traditional lineage, his major students, who were operating in different places and facing different challenges, inevitably developed their own interpretations of the principles he taught.
That sounds like a recipe for internal conflict, for arguments over who has the real Wing Chun.
And while it certainly led to internal disagreements in those classic martial arts lineage battles over authenticity, ultimately, this diversity was Wing Chun's greatest strength.
It prevented the art from becoming culturally dependent on a single location.
Exactly. A single, localized system of transmission. It allowed the core principles to be tested, adapted, and refined for entirely new cultural contexts, whether that was the practical fighting environment of Wang Shun Lung or the philosophical documentation of Mo Yad.
So by allowing multiple interpretations, he gave the art evolutionary flexibility.
That's the key. Had it remained rigidly controlled by one person or one school in Hong Kong, it would have been highly vulnerable to political or cultural shifts. But because the seeds were planted widely and allowed to adapt, Wing Chun could survive and thrive across Europe, North America, and beyond.
And the globalization that followed in the next few decades is the direct result of that openness.
The direct long-term result of the non-rigid approach he instituted.
We can't ignore the powerful role the cinematic universe played in his modern influence. The film series, starting in the late 2000s, effectively created a dramatic cultural rebirth for Wing Chun.
The films were an enormous global amplifier. They catapulted this relatively niche Chinese martial art onto the global stage, making it instantly recognizable to millions of people.
But the relationship between film and history here is complex.
To say the least. The historical fidelity, of course, often took a back seat to dramatic license. The films certainly fictionalized many events, sometimes heavily.
The historical events are compressed, exaggerated.
Or outright fabricated to craft a compelling narrative arc that fits the modern heroic mold. The emphasis on those cinematic one-on-one duels with clear villains, while dramatically satisfying, is a distortion of the quiet, disciplined life the historical Ip Man actually led.
But what the films captured correctly, at least thematically, was the true spirit of the man.
Yes. Resilience, dignity, and the defense of cultural integrity in the face of overwhelming external pressure and chaos.
And that thematic core is what resonated globally. The films functioned as a gateway.
A global entry point to the history. They prompted millions of new students to seek out Wing Chun schools and enthusiasts to research the actual historical figure behind the myth.
So the fictional portrayals, despite their historical flaws, effectively reignited global curiosity in a way that, say, an academic history never could.
It's a perfect case study in how mass media can unintentionally serve the purpose of historical preservation.
So if we look at Wing Chun today, it is a truly living tradition. It exists in various forms. Some lineages emphasize rigid adherence to traditional methods. Others integrate modern sports science.
And those ongoing debates over lineage and interpretation are simply the healthy, inevitable result of a system that has successfully globalized and adapted.
What's most relevant is that the core principles Ip Man preserved and taught remain remarkably consistent across all these interpretations.
Centerline control, stable, relaxed structure, and the absolute necessity of dynamic adaptability.
And these core principles continue to resonate, I think, because they address a very modern desire, seeking efficient self-defense and practical skill rather than competitive spectacle or flashy movements that rely on youth or muscle.
That focus on immediate, practical efficiency is timeless, and Wing Chun's influence has spread far beyond traditional kung fu halls. You can see its philosophical and mechanical elements appearing subtly in mixed martial arts training and general self-defense programs.
And even conceptually in non-physical fields.
Precisely.
You mean the philosophy of using sensitivity and structure instead of pure resistance?
Yes. The concept of using sensitivity to yield to pressure while maintaining one's own core structural integrity, an idea central to Chi-Sao, translates directly into fields like high-pressure negotiation or strategic decision-making.
It's about not meeting force with equal or greater force.
It's about maintaining your center and using the opponent's energy to your advantage.
Which brings us back full circle to the idea of the quiet architect. His greatest achievement wasn't creating a single unbeatable fighting style,
Because as historians, we know no such thing exists.
but in preserving and transmitting a profound way of thinking about movement, about conflict, and about self-mastery across generations.
He saved a historical treasure during an era of unprecedented social and political collapse. His legacy is defined by quiet transmission, the revolutionary openness he instituted, and his personal humility. These qualities ensured the survival of Wing Chun through a social transformation that wiped out countless other cultural traditions.
He didn't seek fame.
He secured existence.
That's a truly reflective conclusion. In an era where spectacle dominates our attention and success is so often measured by loudness and self-promotion, Ip Man's life proves that true mastery is rarely loud.
It is built through patience, through resilience in the face of immense adversity, and the willingness to pass essential knowledge forward across generations without demanding personal recognition.
His life shows us that profound, lasting influence can be achieved not through conquest or aggressive ambition,
but through preservation and patient, disciplined instruction.
So what does this all mean for you today, the listener? If Ip Man's philosophy centered on using adaptation over rigid resistance and quiet structural strength over aggressive display, how can we apply that principle of sensitive structure, that ability to maintain our core while yielding to external pressure, to navigating the rapid, often chaotic changes in our own modern lives, in our careers or in our personal conflicts? Think about that tension between finding your core structure and being flexible enough to adapt to the pressure you feel without breaking.